So when we left off the last video, we had our Model 10-7 spread out all over the bench, and it was full of oil trying to turn back in the dinosaurs. Spent the last few minutes cleaning that up. No, I did not video it. It was nothing special. It was a toothbrush, paper towels, bunch of Q-tips, and good old Hoppy's number 9. And just some time. So now we're going to start reassembling, and we're going to do a basic action job on the gun as we do that. If you look around, there is not a Dremel tool anywhere on this bench. We will not be using a Dremel. If you were reaching for yours, please stop. What we're going to be using are stones. Hard Arkansas stones. Got a big one, smaller one, several that are various shapes to get into different portions of the inside of the frame. And then for one task, we have a file. This is a very fine file, and it is a safe file. The edges are safed. It will only cut here. It does not cut on the edge. So I'm going to zoom you in a little bit. We're going to start with our frame. Whenever you use a stone, you need to make sure that you use oil on the stone and keep it clean. The first area we're going to look at is right here, and this is where the cylinder stop rides. We want that to be very smooth. What we do not want to get into is this little raised circle right here around the trigger stud. Do not touch that. Leave that alone. We're only going to be working in this area here. So we take our smallest stone, put a little bit of oil in the area we're going to work. Yes, you're going to get a view of the back of my hand, but really all I'm doing is using this end of the stone, and I'm rubbing right in here. Not a tremendous amount of pressure. We're not trying to change the dimensions of the frame. We're taking the high spots off. And you can feel it as you go. You can feel how it changes. There's really very little metal being removed. We're just taking the sharp edges off of the machining marks. That's it. Clean our tool. Get in there with a Q-tip. Now you see we've got a little bit of a shiny area here. That's where we've cleaned things up. Now we're going to set the frame aside, and we'll work on our cylinder stop itself. Now the way this engages with the trigger, when everything is in the frame, the cylinder stop sits here, trigger sits here, and the two come together like this. As you pull the trigger, this portion of the trigger moves down, and that bears on the top of this little groove inside the cylinder stop. Moves like this. You want that to happen very quickly and very crisply, because the cylinder stop has to get out of the way to let the cylinder turn. This feels very good when I work these two together. It feels almost like a sear, and it should. So I'm not going to mess with that. Now, when you let go of the trigger, it has to return this way. and pop back into that little slot. It rides up this forward face. Now that feels gritty. There's obvious ridges there. I can feel it. That's an area we can smooth things up. Another spot, or spots that I like to smooth up, here on the sides to correspond with the smoothing we just did in the frame. And on this side only of this portion, I just very carefully break the edge. On a Smith Wesson, the cylinder rotates counterclockwise. So when this is in the gun, the cylinder, let me find something, here we go. The cylinder sits on top of that and it turns this way, which means that the cylinder drags on this side. If you very, very carefully just break that sharp edge right there, it will reduce the severity of the drag line on your cylinder. You do not want to change the dimensions of this piece. Do not make it narrower. Do not make it shorter. All we're doing is taking the sharp edge off. That's it. So for this, we use our larger stone. Some oil on our stone. And all we're going to do is move the cylinder stop back and forth in the oil. And you can feel it. You can feel it as it smooths up. What we're really working on here, in the metal that we're removing, is just little machining flash and just a little bit of a ridge around the edge. And it looks like there was a slight high spot right there. And once it smooths up, it is very, very obvious. You can feel it. So we clean our piece, clean our stone. And if I get the light on it, you can see where the stone shined it. I was not pushing hard. This is just a very light pressure, letting the stone do the work. The oil has to be there to float the little metal particles up out of your stone. And again, I'm not using much pressure. And I don't know if the video will pick it up, but you can hear the change too. It stops being a scritch sound. So there's our other side. Clean our stone again. I want to clean up this area. This was the part that interfaces with the trigger, and that's where it feels gritty right there. So we'll put a little oil on that. Take our small stone, making sure that it is square. You don't want to change the angle. Make sure that it's on there square. And again, we're just lightly polishing. And I can feel the burrs. I can feel the burrs going by in the stone. And they just went away. That's all it takes. And again, we're not pushing hard. We're polishing. That's it. That's all it took. Now for this side, I don't know if the camera will pick it up or not, but there is the tiniest little bit of a burr right there. So oil. Now the cylinder is going to be rotating this way, so that's the direction that I will work. And really, you know, this is not hard pressure. This isn't, you know, this isn't the Hulk smashing things. This is happy little trees. You know, this is the Bob Ross type of metal removal. Very, very gentle. And now we're done with our cylinder stop. I didn't even touch the side here. It was really only on that corner. And not much, but just enough that it's no longer sharp. So now we can put our cylinder stop back in. This involves a little bit of just holding your nose right. And yes, all the extra dog hair comes free. So the cylinder stop sits on this stud. The spring fits into this recess, and there is a corresponding recess. It's kind of hard to see in the frame right there. To get all that back together again without having the spring go whee across the room, we're going to oil first. And the way I did that was to start at the top of the stud and let the oil run down the stud and then spread. So we're going to use a special little screwdriver for this. It's just a hardware store screwdriver, but the sides have been ground down, so it's straight. The whole purpose of this is to compress this little spring as we slide it into this slot. The motion is like this and with a turn. My fingers are going to have to be in the way. I can't do this without getting my fingers in there. So we start by putting the whole thing on the stud. And it's going to want to get cattywampus. You can see how it's already at an angle. So you're going to want to fix that, because you need it to go straight down the stud. And now you can see here how the spring is against this part of the frame, but it's not in the hole. That's where the screwdriver comes into play. And as I said, I have to have my fingers in here, but what I'm going to do is squish the spring, push down on the cylinder stop, straight down, and as the edge of the spring passes the frame, I'm going to turn the screwdriver like that. So we start by getting it in place. I'm now in between the spring and the frame. I get my finger in the right position. I squish my spring. I turn the whole thing, and in it goes. Now we have to lift up just a touch because I went just a little bit too far. And there it is. Now the spring is not quite straight. If it isn't straight, just reach in with your screwdriver, give it a little push. And what you want is for the cylinder stop to have good tension, but to be able to move. And it does have to be in exactly the right position in order to do its thing. That's our cylinder stop. Next, we're going to work on the bolt. It goes here. This is our bolt. It goes into this slot. There is a hole here that this piece fits into. And it drops into that slot right there. Now this one moves back and forth pretty easily. I can feel just a little bit of as it does that. Just a little bit of a couple of ridges in there. It is below the surface of the frame. That's important. I'm using my finger as a gauge here. I can feel that this is below the surface of the frame. So we're going to take that back out. This is where our special file comes in. I'm not really going to do a whole lot to this. And again, not pushing. I'm really just kind of using the weight of the file. And all I'm doing is knocking down any little burrs. You can see every once in a while the file will catch. Just knocking down little burrs on the edges. Not going hard on it. Just our happy little file. We're really polishing. Hear that change right there? It's because I found a burr. Use all of your senses when you do this. How it feels, how it sounds. I suppose you could go by how it smells, but right now it just smells like hoppies in here. These machining marks are not going to be a big deal because, again, it is below the surface of the frame. I'm just knocking off any sharp corners. That's really it. There's a little bit of a burr right there. And again, you can hear the difference. I'm not trying to take it completely off. I'm just smoothing it out. Okay, so there's that. Now, we'll get in here to the frame, and we'll do the same thing. Because if you look here in the frame, you can see some machining marks right there where I just put that oil. We're going to take a different stone. This one fits in the slot. And once again, we just work back and forth. Take off the high parts. I'm not trying to make this into a mirror. We're just taking off the sharp edges. Always clean your stone. Q-tip cleans the area. And now we're ready to put our bolt in. So this is, Again, the world's tiniest spring. We're not going to get in here and lubricate this spring very often, so it's probably one of those once-in-a-lifetime lubrication things. So I'm going to put just a tiny, tiny little bitty dab of grease on it. Come on. If you don't do that, the grease will continue to bleed out and you end up with a big mess on your bench. So there's just this little bitty blob of grease. I'm going to put this into here. Spread that grease around some. And then again, because we don't do this very often, we'll put just a tiny smear of grease down in this channel. And you can see there is not much there. It's just a little bit. Putting this in is very similar to the cylinder stop. It will go part of the way, but you have to compress that plunger, and that's where that screwdriver comes into play again. I'm going to two-step this. The first step is to push it in and get it past this side of the frame. Then we'll reposition and we'll get it the rest of the way in. Now my finger is there to prevent it from going wee across the room. But there's our first step. We're not all the way in, but we're past that part of the frame. Now we come in from this side with the screwdriver. We're going to push the plunger into the bolt. It just slipped past, and now it just pops in. We'll test for free movement. It feels much better than it did before. And now it's time to put our thumb piece and thumb piece nut back on. Now, I do not see any evidence here of dragging, either on the frame or on the nut. I'm sorry, the thumb piece. If there was, we would take our stone and clean up this side of the thumb piece if there were any burrs on it that were dragging on the frame. In this case, it's not. So our thumb piece, we'll put just a little bit of oil right there, just to help. Excuse me. You have to slide the bolt back just slightly to get the thumb piece to sit on there, because this raised portion fits in that slot. So once that's in place, you can take your nut, drop it in, get the appropriate sized screwdriver. My hands are going to be in the way. And to make sure that you've started this thing properly, turn it the wrong way. And you'll hear a click, or you'll feel it when you get to the end of the threads. Then you know you're aligned. So now, and what I'm doing here with my other hand is just keeping the screwdriver straight in the slot. But we'll tighten that up. This does not have to be Mongo tight. It just needs to be snug. So hands are going to be in the way a little bit, and there we are. We'll do a visual check. It's hard to get the light right for the camera, but what I'm doing is looking for light in between the thumb piece and the frame. That tells me that there won't be any dragging. I can get it to where I can see that there's no light, but getting it to where you can see that is difficult. So we have good movement. The thumb piece is what secures the bolt in place. If you don't put that back on, the bolt will flop around, that little spring will go sproing, the plunger will disappear, and you don't have a good day. Now we're ready for the next piece, the trigger. We already talked about how the trigger interfaces with the cylinder stop. So we cleaned up this part of the cylinder stop. I'm also going to clean up this part of the trigger right there. Not going to touch this part because that is what bears here and pulls the cylinder stop down. So we're not going to touch that. We're only going to do a little bit here on top. We're also going to do just a little bit for the trigger bevel, this area here, and the double action sear interface. This is what touches when you're just pulling the trigger through. We are not going to touch the actual sear on the trigger. There's no need to. Just trust me. So we put a little bit of oil. We get our stone. Move that out of the way. Once again, we are not bearing down on this. It is not heavy pressure. And the way the stone feels is very important. We're keeping it square, listening and feeling. And when you first start, you can feel the ridges. But then after just a little bit, they smooth out and it's no longer going under your hand, it's just sliding back and forth. Now I'm also going to round this edge just a touch. Not a lot. It's just enough to help it slip by. And you can't even really tell that I was there, but it's much smoother than it was. So here, we do not want to touch this edge. All we're going to do is right here and just a little bit on that transition. Having a few ridges is actually better than having it glass smooth because the ridges will retain lubrication. What you don't want is sharp ridges. Now again, we're staying square. And all we're doing is making it so that the ridges aren't sharp. You can see just a few shiny spots appearing there. Those are places where there was a high spot. Not pressing down hard, we're just polishing. And now we're going to go around the corner. Again, just to break the sharp edge. That's it. And there we are. So all those spots, you remember just a little bit ago, this was completely black. All those spots are where there was a high point. We haven't taken it down to glass smooth, it's not a mirror, but the high points are gone. So our trigger is now ready to go in. This little guy is what fits into this part of the rebound slide. Make sure that that is inside, because it is possible to assemble with that sticking out like that, and it doesn't work. Just trust me. So you want to lift this up. Oh, hey, you know what? We don't have a hand on there. Give me a hand. We need to put our hand back on. So if you just put it into the hole, it flops around. It has to have spring tension. So the way to do that is you need, bear with me here while I get the right tool. You need a punch that fits into this slot. That one's a little too tight. Just right. So the punch needs to fit into that slot. I'll show you why. There is a spring in here. It's there at the end of the pencil. You can also see it here. One leg of the spring is on this pin. The other leg of the spring goes on that pin. So what we have to do is push that spring far enough up that we can slide, and you can kind of see through the window there maybe. And this is where having a beer gut kind of helps, because you can put the punch against your beer gut, hold it in place, drop the hand in, and now the hand is under spring tension. And if you look in there, you can see that the leg of the spring is on that little stud. It pivots on that one. So now we have spring tension. And see, there is a reason for drinking all that beer. You have to develop the beer gut so that you can reinstall the hand on your trigger. Once again, we lubricate just on the top of the stud. You know what? I've gotten ahead of myself. I need to do something. I need to clean up in here before I put the trigger in. I forgot. Too busy talking, not paying enough attention to the work. If I turn this just right, you can see a shiny spot right there. That's where the rebound slide has been bearing on the frame. We're also going to clean up right in here these machining marks. Now, once again, we do not want to touch the trigger boss or the hammer boss. It's this little circle. We're only going to be working in this area and on that. So we take our square stone. We've already put some oil in. We're holding it square to the frame. And again, we're just going to go back and forth. Not pushing real hard, not trying to dig all the way through. We're just taking off the high spots. And you can feel them. You'll feel it as you move the stone back and forth. You don't need to get all this up here. We're really only concentrating on this area down here where the rebound slide rides. Put a little bit more oil in. Square, back and forth. Clean the stone. Wipe this off. And now, again, if I turn the light just right, there we go. You can see the high spots that came off. Not trying to make it a mirror. All we want to do is to get rid of those high spots. Now we can put our trigger in. Lubricate, because I just wiped it all out. Make sure that's up. Pull the hand back, and then the trigger just drops in. It will be snug. And then the hand fits into the hand window. So you may have to pull just a touch. There we go. You can see it from this side. If you want to see how the trigger and cylinder stop interface with each other, out of the way, and then reset. Next up is our hammer. Looking at the hammer, I see a pretty even wear pattern here. I'm not going to mess with that. This is the double action sear. It's held in place by this pin. Got to remember there's a camera there. Held in place by this pin, and there is another one of those world's itty-bittiest springs inside here. So I think what I will do is take this guy, and I'll just come in here again. We're just going to polish lightly, not doing a whole lot to it. Less is more. And I'm being very careful to keep this from touching down here. That's why I'm using the sharp edge of the stone. I hope you're noticing that there really isn't, it's not grinding in here. We're very gently polishing. This is the hammer sear, and there is this little bitty ridge. I'm going to zoom you way in. Right here. That is the sear. Not this big one down here. It's this little bitty guy right there. It is so easy to screw that up. Don't even try. Just don't try. Yes, there is a jig and I have one that lets you work on the trigger and the hammer and keep all of the angles right. I did it once just to make sure that I knew how the jig worked, and I have never touched it again, because the Smith & Wesson sears are just fine as they come from the factory. What we're doing here is we're really tuning everything else. That little tiny itty-bitty engagement surface does not provide enough resistance to give you a 9-pound trigger pull. Where all that comes from is everything else that moves, everything that spins and slides and flops. All of that adds up to your trigger pull. It's not right there. So again, we'll put a little bit on that. Now you can put in the rebound slide first, or you can put the hammer in first. Either way. Reach around to this side, pull back, with your other finger, bring that back. Then, I'm trying to do this to where you can see it. The hammer will just drop in. That was a screwdriver. So now, you have to move the bolt if you want to see how things interface with each other, but this is how it works. Next up is our rebound slide. We'll move this guy down. Here's the rebound slide. Now we're going to polish the rebound slide before it goes in. And what we're going to do is polish this side. You can see how it's a little grungy there. This side's already pretty well polished. We're going to do a little bit up here, not much. This is the hammer seat. I'll show you that after this goes back in. We don't want to change the height of this. We just want it to be smooth. And we want this transition, this step, to be easy. We're also going to break the sharp edge here at the front corners and at the rear so that it slides back and forth easily. Once again, not much pressure. Doesn't take much pressure. And you will feel when it goes smooth. Right there. There's not really any point in going farther than that because it's already smooth. After that, you're just making it shiny. And you can kind of see where we took off the high spots. So we'll do the same for this side. Sometimes this pin sticks out and drags. Just polishing until it goes smooth. It's really hard to describe. Just imagine dragging your finger across a piece of sandpaper and then transitioning to a piece of glass. It feels like that. Didn't take much off, just the high spots. So to do this side, we have to come over here to the edge of the stone. The pin's in the way. I can feel some drag there, but what I'm feeling is at the very edges, the very ends. It's not really in the middle, it's a burr on the sharp corner. So we will pick it up, add a little more oil to the stone. We'll pick it up and we'll round off those edges. We're not trying to make it shaped differently. All we're doing is removing the sharp edge. That's it. And I am going it at an angle so that that corner right there gets rounded off. And you want to change your angle everywhere from like this to like that to make sure that you have all the burrs off. Then we'll switch and we'll do this end. A little more oil. Get our corners. Now for this top part, again, I do not want to change the height of that trigger step. All I want to do is smooth off the transition. So we'll oil it up, make sure that we're square, we don't have any burrs, and then we go around the corner. And what I'm doing is rotating the stone around the corner. And I can feel as I get to there, I can feel the sharp edge. So that's what I want to round off. The whole point of doing this is to allow this portion right here of the hammer to ride up onto this after you have let go of the trigger. Everything adds up. Excuse me. The weight of the spring required to make the trigger reset has to be overcome in order to pull the trigger. So if you can reduce how much friction there is on the reset, you can reduce how strong the spring needs to be, which will then reduce your trigger pull. So the last place we need to work on is inside there, because there's a spring that rides inside that, and we need to make sure that there aren't ridges inside that. So we'll put this file away. We're done with him. And we'll get out a round file. Assuming I can find it. There it is. Not going in here to remove tremendous amounts of metal. I'm going to get this out of the way so no shavings fall into it. This is just a very light, oh, right there, felt the catch. You do this one by feel. If it feels smooth, you don't have to do anything there. Right there was a catch. And I'm just kind of going around the circle. And now we're smooth. And we're done with that file. Now we'll use a Q-tip to get inside here, clean everything out. And it's time to reinstall this. Now this is the factory reset spring, the rebound spring, and it is a heavy sucker. I use Wolf reduced power rebound springs. There are different weights you can get. The factory one is something like 17 pounds, this guy. And that adds tremendously to your trigger pull. It gives you a very snappy return on the trigger. Don't worry about the length. Look at the difference in the thickness of the wire between the original and the replacement. So this is a Wolf 11-pound spring. It compresses much easier. May not be enough. I start here. If I don't like the trigger return, I can go up to a 12 or a 13 or a 14. And what you're doing is you're striking a balance between how fast and hard the trigger goes forward and how much resistance you want on the trigger pull. I've learned to get my finger out of the damn way. So I can go with an 11-pound spring, and yes, the trigger does return. It returns on its own. It does not push my finger out of the way like a 17-pound spring would. It goes forward, everything works. So here we have, oh, remember how I said it oozes out? Yeah, that's what it does. Yeah, thanks. That's what I needed. We'll put that there. So I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the spring. Not a tremendous amount. This is an area where, again, you don't get access to very often. So you want your lubrication to stay there. So I'm going to put him in there. Turn this. Put some oil on our surfaces. And then this guy fits in here like this. That little stud on the back of the trigger, right there, goes into that hole. Now, without the spring, it'll just drop right in. But with the spring, you have a problem. You have to compress the spring to get it back around that stud. Now, this is the tool we use to take the spring out. Yes, you can use it to push the spring back in. Unfortunately, it slips off, and it isn't all that fun. So I use that special ground screwdriver again, and it's ground to a size that will fit inside this spring. So I just push it in, push it down a little bit. Now, it's not all the way in now, but the side of the spring is now on that stud. So the stud is holding it. And I can pull my screwdriver out. Now I can use this tool to push it the rest of the way down. Now we need to make sure that all of our pieces are firmly seated. At this point we should, if we pull back here, we should be able to actually cycle the action. Now there's no spring on the hammer, so I have to push to help it. And one of the things that I'm looking for is that. When I let go of the trigger, I want it to return on its own. So all of our pieces are in place. Make sure that our hand is not dragging on anything. I'm going to put a little bit of oil right here to help him out. A little bit up here, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit in between. Not a lot of oil. Don't fill it full of grease. Don't use 50 weight racing oil. This is very lightweight gun oil. The trigger pull is actually better with just a little bit of lubrication. Not much lubrication. Yes, I have the data to back that up. All right, next, spring and our strain screw. There's various ways to do this to reduce the hammer tension. You can reduce the width of this spring, not the thickness, the width, and that will change the tension. You can shorten the strain screw to get to where you want to be, or you can pick up a lot of it, not all, get to pick that up literally because I dropped it. You can pick up a lot of that by switching to a Wolf mainspring. Slightly different tension, but it also has this rib in it. And there may be an engineering function for that in the spring, but what it does is it allows your screw to go a little bit farther in, and it has the same effect as shortening the screw. So we're going to hook at the hammer. And I'm doing this kind of backwards so that you can see it. We hook at the hammer, and then we hook at the frame. Then our strain screw goes in. We do not want to make this fully tight. I'm only tightening this enough to hold it in place. While we're here, we need to check and make sure that the spring does not stick out either side of the frame. Next, hammer block. I need my file again. So the hammer block was introduced after during World War II, because the original design did not include this. And a sailor in the U.S. Navy dropped his Smith Wesson onto the hammer, and it went off and it killed him. So this is the answer. And all I'm going to do with this, I'm just rearranging things so that metal shavings don't go inside the gun. All I'm going to do here is just like we did with the bolt. We're going to just smooth off any sharp edges. Some places it's cutting, some places it's not. That's okay. We're also going to come down here, take off the high spots, and you can see the shiny spots appearing. At least I hope you can. There they are. Those are just the high places that are being taken down to the same level as everything else. Do the same on this side. Now, if there are issues, you can also get in here with a file and clean up the inside. Not something that I always do, but since we're talking about it, let me show you what I have in mind. It's the same sort of thing. You're just breaking the sharp edges. Not making the hole bigger. We're just smoothing the inside. That's it. Something you can do to help with the reset is to put just a little bit of a bevel here at the top of this flag. So I'm going to go off camera just for a second and do that over the garbage can. Again, not doing a tremendous amount to it. Just taking off the sharp edge so that it can slide back into position a little more easily. Hopefully the sound of the file is coming through and you can hear when I hit the sharp edge and when it goes away. So that's it. Not much. Just enough to help it slide back into position. That off. Bring this guy back. A little bit of oil here, a little bit of oil where it rides. So this fits in here and onto that stud. And to put your side plate on, it needs to be in the top position all the way up. So the stud is at the bottom of the slot. So here's our side plate. While I've got all my stuff here, since we smoothed that, I'm going to get in here and smooth where it rides. There's some pretty good ridges in there. Not trying to make this area look like that. Just taking out the high spots. Now we'll use this one. And we'll go into the slot. That's all we're going to do in there. And we'll put a little bit of oil in here and in there. Now our side plate has to fit that groove around the hammer block. So start at the top, get the block in the groove, and then it just presses into place. If you there's the wireless doorbells doing their thing, scaring away the Amazon guy. So if you feel like you have to force the side plate back on, something's wrong. You should not have to force that. So you don't want to listen to the dogs bark. I don't want to redo an hour of video. I'm going to stop now. We'll pick up again in part 3B, and we'll work on our cylinder and the final checks.